Hello, I'm Richard with EV4U Custom Conversions. And in today's video, we're going to talk about things that are not recommended. Okay, we're going to talk about procedures and designs that we do not recommend. So behind me is this 1974 VW Thing, and this was converted by somebody else. This was not converted by EV4U. And it has come to us to have some repairs and modifications made. And some of those items are going to include a few things that we're going to discuss in today's video. We're going to change things that were done that are not recommended, and we're going to change it to a better scenario. So join me as we take a look at a few of these things, and you'll see why we recommend our online EV workshops, because you will learn all the things to do and not to do in regards to doing a conversion. So today's video is not to be negative or anything. It's just to point out a few things to be aware of and to not do because they are not recommended. Okay, we're on the back side of the vehicle here. First thing I'm going to mention is that in your overall design of a conversion, you don't want to have components, battery boxes, whatever, hang down to where it's the low point of the vehicle, or that it's going to affect the going in and out of driveways or whatever. And so this vehicle has an enclosure around the motor, and so it has dropped the low point far lower than it needs to be. It's not critical in this case. It still has, a fair amount of ground clearance, so forth. But I'm just using this to be able to bring up a point. And so, not necessarily critical against this particular setup and design. I wouldn't have done it this way, but anyway, just be aware that, in your design, don't have, items that are going to be the low point that can be hit by, something laying in the roadway or in your egress or whatever that could possibly rub or make contact with the pavement or a road hazard. Best to have the EV components and layout be in such a fashion that they are not a low point or striking point. Okay? The real thing I want you to take note of is that this piece right here would have been fine. It's mounted to the motor right here. I don't know if we can see that. Let me take a look here. Yeah, you can see this bolt. This has been removed, and I just stuck this one bolt back in here to put it in place so you can see what I'm talking about. But this panel is bolted to the motor and then also to the body of the car, okay, sheet metal of the vehicle. And so to some of you this is going to be obvious, but maybe not to others. And that is, you do not want to have a mechanical connection between the motor, which can torque, and the body of the car, which is rigid. So the motor is shock mounted, or they should be, okay? And this one is. And when you're accelerating or decelerating, that motor is going to torque a little bit. Now this one has brand new polyurethane transaxle mounts, and so it's probably pretty rigid, but you got to remember this motor right here, this is the AC50, it's capable of 120 pound-feet of torque, and any little movement is going to put stress on something. And the weak link is going to be the sheet metal, but it's also, transmits noise and vibration from the motor directly to the body of the vehicle. So, not recommended. Okay? The motor should be shock mounted, and you should not have any connections between the motor and anything rigid on the frame or body of the vehicle. Okay? Now, with that in mind, let's take a look inside the engine bay. Okay, so here's the view inside the engine bay, and you can see we have some recognizable components here. We have our main disconnect, we've got a shunt, we've got a fuse, the main contactor, the inverter. Back up in here is the throttle. Well, what I wanted to point out is the fact that this is a little pan that they put here. It's a piece of sheet metal that's mounted to the body, and then here's your main contactor that's mounted on that piece, so it's mounted to the body and it's very, very rigid. Okay, and then they have a copper 1/8-inch thick copper bus bar, rigid copper bus bar, that goes between the main contactor and the inverter. So it's the same scenario I just described. Zoom in so you can see it here. In that this is rigid and this is shock mounted. So the inverter has, because it's mounted directly on top of the motor, it's mounted to the motor. Okay, and we'll look at that in just a moment. So this is rigid to the body. This is a shock mounted, this side is a shock mounted component. So again, there's going to be slight movement, and you have this rigid connection here. So what's going to happen? Well, it's going to put stress on these terminals, and one or both are going to be damaged. And I'm guessing probably both will end up being damaged. So what we're looking at here is a mounting point where they've mounted a piece of aluminum to the back side of the motor. Okay. The other part of that is mounted up front here on the adapter. Probably not going to be able to see it because I can't get the camera all the way in here. But anyway, so it's mounted to the motor, and the chill plate and inverter are mounted to that. Now, the reason that's not recommended is that the inverters are one of the more sensitive things to heat. An item that is sensitive to heat, and you're placing it in direct connection and in proximity to the item in the conversion that creates the most heat, the motor. And it's not uncommon for these motors to reach 60 to 80 degrees Celsius. They're rated up to 120, and so it's a fair amount of heat that's produced, and the inverter is mounted just on top of it. If I can try to get a shot of it there. But anyway, so it's getting preheated. That aluminum chill plate is being preheated, and its purpose is to cool the inverter. Well, we're heating it due to a direct physical connection to the motor and proximity right above the motor. And heat rises, and so it's a fairly popular thing you see being done. It's because it's an easy way to mount the inverter in close proximity, which you don't want it too far away, and so it's just a simple way to do that. It's not the best from an engineering standpoint, and I'm giving it another not recommended. So at a glance here, there's a couple other things that we'll mention that are not recommended. And one is, this is the, right inside the, deck lid here of the engine bay. And so right here, this is the most positive point in the traction pack, and this is the most negative point. So this is, the pack voltage. And on this one, it's a maximum of 130 volts. And I forget what the nominal was on the pack that they had in here, but between 120 and 130 volts. And so it's not like it's, real high voltage, but it's not so much about the voltage that we're concerned about, or that you would shock yourself by touching it, is that having all of this exposed, if you accidentally laid something down and it fell on it, or something drops on it, it's not recommended. These things should have been designed in such a way that they're not going to be easily accessed or touched. So you can do that by putting boots over this, or even if it was just placed further, deeper in the engine bay here, where it's not likely that things will fall on it or accidentally touch it or whatever. Let's go take a look under the front, under the bonnet. Well, this is the shot under the bonnet. And this is the J1772 charge port, if I can get my hand out of the way. So you can see the charge port was put underneath this little VW logo. And J1772, that's a level 2 protocol. That's 220 volts, 30 amps. And here's where it comes in, right here. So if this is plugged in and charging, we have the potential of 220, 30 amps right here. Again, unprotected, right inside. Boom. Not recommended. I find it kind of ironic, a little 12 volt fuse block right here. It's got a cover, but the 220 AC doesn't. Again, I'm assuming this is traction pack voltage right here. So we've got positive and negative again, right next to each other, not protected. So, not recommended. Here's another thing that comes to attention right here. We have the output right here. This is the output from this 5 kilowatt Elcon charger. This is the output, okay? And they have an Anderson connector here. And you can see the gauge of the wire being used. What I want you to note is it comes over, so we're coming from the charger through an Anderson connector, through another Anderson connector. Too many connectors, that's, again, not recommended. Why they couldn't have made, one connection go from here to wherever else they wanted to go. But what I wanted to point out is the gauge of the wire here is different than the gauge of the wire here. This is smaller. So, the manufacturer had a reason for using a certain gauge wire, and we're going down in size considerably at this point right here. Kind of a final note here, and that is this auxiliary battery, this 12-volt auxiliary battery here. Now, it's true, you know, you don't have to have as large a battery typically for a conversion that you have, you know, in your internal combustion car. We're not, you know, starting a, you know, an internal combustion engine. We don't need that, those cold cranking amps. But we do need to have some capacity, because there's always a load on your auxiliary battery if you design the system the way I would recommend, because you have instrumentation that's on all time, and a lot of cars have, you know, stereos and alarm systems and remote entry or whatever other things that are on all the time, and whether or not they're a load or not is another matter, but the instrumentation will be on all the time, so there's always a drain. And so even major manufacturers I've seen since we started this business, you know, about 13 years ago, that they're starting to use larger capacity auxiliary batteries, because especially the newer modern cars have a fair amount of constant drain on the 12-volt system. So this is really undersized for this particular vehicle, because this vehicle has heated seats. It has a few other 12-volt. It's got a good size heater with, you know, a fan. It's got more 12-volt demands than the stock VW thing had, and this is kind of undersized for this application, in my opinion, so not recommended. This is only a 20 amp hour AGM. That's pretty small. Typically, I wouldn't recommend anything smaller than, say, a 60. So here's one more item that, you know, just looking at this and talking to you. Notice how many, and we removed the ground, of course, before we did any work, and we've removed the modules that came in here. This had the smart car modules were in here originally, and there was a pack in the front here, one behind the back seats and one in the engine bay. There were 16 modules total. So there was an issue with some of the modules. We didn't do any testing. It came to us. They wanted the modules replaced, and so we removed those, and they were picked up and they're gone. But before we started, of course, we disconnected the 12-volt battery, shut off the main disconnect, and we removed some interconnects so that there was no longer a complete circuit in each of the modules. Anyway, one of the things I wanted to make note of is all these wires coming off of, you know, this one connection here, and you can see it's loose. It's just not the best design. It's not recommended. Recommend going from your 12-volt battery and then go to you know, a terminal block or some other point where you can then take all of the 12-volt signals off. I think I got an example handy I can show you. Here's an example on one of our car trailers where we have the power coming from a 12-volt battery to run a whole bunch of different accessories in the trailer, and they come to a terminal strip. So your positive and negative end covered with a boot, and then this is a terminal strip. And so instead of having this many connections going directly to the battery, they come to this terminal strip. It's just a much better way to do it. If I needed to test or do something with any of these things, or remove that circuit, I don't have to disconnect all those things from the battery and then connect them all back. I can just disconnect them one at a time, individually. So that's what I recommend, what we saw in the car
is not recommended.
So this video is mainly focused on things that that are not recommended. But I did want to point out a few things that I do recommend. One is they have the main disconnect in an obvious and easy location to activate. Another is the use of looming. And so all these wires, and you can see there's quite a few of them coming off of here, they're loomed. And so this is all neat. Nothing's going to get caught on something or be a problem. It's nicely loomed. Another example is he's got the wiring nicely routed, so it's easy to see where things are going, and then wire tied, zip tied. So that part, I do recommend. Like I said, there are some nice aspects of this, nice use of the looming and ties. He's got like some kind of tape around the end here, and then zip ties. So, there are aspects that were done nicely, and there's aspects that I don't recommend. This thing had a cooling system for these battery modules. It was quite impressive. A heck of a lot of work. I mean, oh my gosh, these beautiful manifolds and all this plumbing, tons of, I mean, the cost of the hose clamps in this conversion must have been horrendous. I mean, just incredible, the amount of plumbing and everything. Metal work in this was very well done, very nice. With louvers on the side, I mean, there was a lot of work went into this, a lot of work. Couple other things of note. See where they're going through the sheet metal here? It's got grommets. So that is recommended, either grommets or gland nuts to protect the wires where they pass through sheet metal and stuff. He's got the same thing for the plumbing over here. Recommended. He also used a secondary return spring on the throttle. That also is recommended. So, like I said, not everybody does everything right always, and not everybody does everything wrong always. So we're not doing this to point fingers at anybody or any of that type of thing. I'm just using it as an example to point out things that are not recommended, as well as a few things that are. And for, sharing these for strictly educational purposes. In conclusion, we pointed out some things that we do not recommend, and we pointed out a few things that we do recommend. And so I want to point out another thing that we highly recommend, and that is our online EV workshops. Now, we're well known for our 3-day hands-on conversion workshop that we did not offer those last year due to the pandemic. We don't have any scheduled this year at this point for the same reason. But the online workshop is always recommended. Even if we were offering the in-person workshops, I recommend the online workshop because in preference to the in-person one, and for the following reasons. One is there's more content on the online version, and that's because we don't have a 3-day time restriction. Okay, so you get more content. You have exposure to more examples and vehicles on the online version than you have in person. because we're not restricted by space. So the space and time restrictions are not the same online as they are in person. The other is access. If you take a 3-day hands-on workshop, you got 3 days, okay? After 3 days, we usually, we're waving goodbye. With the online workshop, you have 1 year from the date of purchase to access any and all of that information. And so I think that's a huge benefit. And another is that included with the online workshop is 1 hour of free consultation service. So we recommend that you take the workshop and complete it. And if you have any questions at that time, because most of the questions you'll have will be answered somewhere along the way in the workshop. And if you have any questions, contact us. Better yet, take the workshop, do your conversion, and then you can refer back to the workshop as need be. And then if you have any questions or issues along the way, feel free to contact us. We're happy to help in any way that we can to make sure that you're successful at your endeavor. So you can find that. There's a link on our website, which is evforyounow.com, or you can go directly to the workshop website, and it's evworkshops, and that's plural, workshops.com. If you have any questions, don't leave them on YouTube, okay? Because we don't monitor that very much, and typically those who do monitor don't have the ability to answer your questions. So the best way to get a question answered right away is to email us at info@evforyounow.com. info@evforyounow.com, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have pertaining to the do's and don'ts of a conversion. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you again, and until then, hope you enjoy the ride.